Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Sabbath, December 10th, 2022. And today we're going to continue with part two of understanding the kingdom of Yahweh. Last week, I began to describe what the kingdom of Yahweh is all about. And we're going to continue that today. And I want to first turn over to Romans chapter 1, which we briefly touched upon last week, but I want to go over it again. So Romans chapter 1, verse 1, and it reads, Paul, a bondservant of Messiah Yahshua, called as an apostle, set apart for the gospel of Elohim. So this term gospel is the word euangelion, which means good news. The allusion to good news is that of a herald in the ancient world, which would be very similar to broadcasts that we would have today over the news, or, today we do everything, of course, electronically and digitally, and it's instantaneous. In the ancient world, of course, it took a lot longer than that. And it would be the announcement of a ruler, a new Caesar typically, that would be coming into power. And it was an announcement for people throughout the realm, throughout the territories of the ruler, in this case would have been of the Roman Empire, to notify them that there was a change in leadership and that they needed to get themselves prepared to be able to receive that leader and his rule. So when Paul goes out there as a bondservant of Messiah, as an apostle, the word apostle has to do with someone who is called for a particular, who is sent out rather for a purpose of being an ambassador of sorts. And he was set apart. In other words, he was made holy for this purpose. He was sanctified for this purpose. Now, this word actually, in this particular case, is not the word that we typically use for holiness. It's a word that has to do with separated or divided. He was separated specifically for this purpose, but the concept is similar. And he was set apart specifically for this good news of Elohim, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. So one example of where he would have promised this is let's say over in Isaiah 52, which I read last week, but I can read it again now. So if we could turn to Isaiah 52, verse 7. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation and says to Zion, your Elohim reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices. They shout joyfully together, for they will see with their own eyes when Yahweh restores Zion. Break forth, shout joyfully together, you waste places of Jerusalem, for Yahweh has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Yahweh has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, that all the ends of the earth may see the salvation of our Elohim. So this is a proclamation of someone who is bringing salvation. So when you couple that idea with that of the Apostle Paul, who went throughout many portions of the known world then under Rome to announce this gospel, to announce this good news, he was announcing the arrival of a new king. He was announcing the arrival of a new kingdom, which was not in place completely in terms of its presence, its physical presence. However, it was in place in terms of the leader who was installed, and that is through Yahshua the Messiah, who through his death and resurrection inaugurated that kingdom of Yahweh, as we see over in Matthew 28. So he talks here in Romans 1, he continues concerning his son. That's the gospel, right? Which he promised through his prophets concerning his son. We also look at Daniel chapter 7 and other places, who was born of a descendant of David according to the flesh. So that descendancy from David indicates kingship, right? It indicates messiahship, who was declared the son of Yahweh, or the son of Elohim, with power by the resurrection from the dead. So this being declared the son of Elohim by the resurrection from the dead is an allusion to the purpose of the kingdom, which is to renew all things, to bring a renewal of that intimacy that existed between Yahweh and mankind in Eden, according to the Spirit of holiness, Yahshua Messiah, our Master, through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles and among all the nations for his name's sake, among whom you also are the called of Yahshua Messiah. And then if you go down to verse 14, he says, I am under obligation, this is Paul speaking of himself, I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. So for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel, the good news, to you also who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of Elohim for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. So there's a unification that's implied by the gospel message. In other words, everyone in the kingdom is brought together. All of humanity is brought together under Yahweh's king. All of humanity, Jew, Gentile, everyone. For in it, the righteousness in what? And it is the power of Elohim for salvation to everyone who believes. For in it, the righteousness of Elohim is revealed. In what? In the gospel, in the good news. The righteousness of Yahweh is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. And that's an allusion to Habakkuk 2:4. The kingdom represents a number of things, right? It represents a unification of all of humanity. So in that sense, it is a reversal of the Tower of Babel, where people were scattered and their languages were confused because they were trying to effect a utopia of sorts without necessarily being subjected to Almighty Yahweh. It was making a name for themselves. Let us make a name for ourselves, right? So let's turn there just for a moment and let's see Genesis 11. The whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. And then Yahweh came down to see it. Behold, they are one. He said they are one people, and they all have the same language. He says they're one people. They're an Am Echad, which is interesting. It's kind of a play on words of the Shema, but they're not an Am Echad for good, right? They are one people, and they all have the same language. In other words, they're all speaking a common tongue, but that common tongue is not for a good type of unity. This is what, in other words, they're all of unity of purpose, but for the wrong things. They're all one people, they all have the same language, but there's a problem. This is what they begin to do, what you're seeing here, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. And what they're doing is not a good thing. So Yahweh spreads them out and he scatters them. He confused the language of the whole earth, and he scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth because he didn't want them to continue in this twisted purpose of trying to make a name for themselves. It says echad, yes. They're trying to make a name for themselves, and they're doing it outside of the guidance and the purposes of Almighty Yahweh. Yeah, it's really audacious that they're doing it, but they're not doing it for the honor and glory of Almighty Yahweh. So he's turning things around when Yahshua is resurrected and he ascends. Then the Babylonish way of doing things is turned around. Yahweh reverses this scattering of the people, and now he starts to bring them together under the blanket of his assembly, what people out there call the church, right? He brings them under the assembly so that he can restore them to the type of unity that will lead to good things, right? That will lead to a reunification of heaven and earth. In other words, a restoration of Eden, a restoration of humanity's intimacy with Almighty Yahweh that they enjoyed with him in Eden. This is what you see when you look at at the so-called Master's Prayer, right? Over in Matthew 6, the Our Father, yes? So if you go over to Matthew 6, where he's teaching the disciples to pray, he says, verse 9, this is Matthew 6, verse 9, he says, pray then in this way. So he's giving a model prayer. He's giving the pattern. He says, Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. So first of all, he acknowledges that the one to whom we owe our allegiance, our Father, is in heaven, right? And his name is holy. So we acknowledge the sanctity of Yahweh's holy name. Then it says, your kingdom come. We want your kingdom. We want your government. We want your rule. We want your will to be done on earth as it is being done in heaven. This is the reunification of heaven and earth. That split that occurred at the Garden of Eden is going to be mended, and Yahweh is going to have intimacy with his creation once again. And then it goes on and speaks other things that we won't go into at the moment. But notice that this is front and center, sanctifying Yahweh's name and the kingdom of Yahweh, right? So compare that, for example, with Genesis 28, where Jacob has his dream. And in Genesis 28, beginning with verse 10, it says, then Jacob, this is Genesis 28, verse 10, then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place. And it's interesting that he takes a stone. The word is Evan. And the reason I make an issue of that, not an issue, the reason I point that out is because of Daniel chapter 2. You, O king, because remember that there's language, the Daniel 7 language is indicative of Yahshua's ascent to the throne. And then Daniel 2, you, O king, were looking. This is Daniel speaking to the king of Babylon. 31. You, O king, this is Nebuchadnezzar. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. And then he describes the statue and he goes through it. And the statues, of course, represent succeeding kingdoms or empires. In other words, the kingdoms of men, right? The kingdoms of mankind, all of whom work counter purpose to Almighty Yahweh. So in that sense, they're like the Tower of Babel, right? Which is representative of the nations doing their thing without Yahweh. It's kind of like Psalm chapter 2, where the nations are raging against Yahweh and against his anointed. It's all the same. You see how it's all together? And he says, so he sees the statue and all the parts of the statue are representative of different successive kingdoms or succeeding kingdoms, all of which are at odds with Almighty Yahweh. And it's a similar situation you see in Daniel 7, where it talks about these powers and represented as beasts, for example, and they're doing their worst upon mankind. And then the Ancient of Days crushes them by means of the Son of Man, right? So in verse 35 of chapter 2 of Daniel, then verse 34, you continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. What's that word stone? If you look in the lower left, that's the word Evan, same thing. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone, the Evan, that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So this mountain fills the whole earth. So again, it's the glory of Yahweh that's now filling the whole earth, which is Yahweh's intention from Eden forward to restore his people and their intimacy with him, so that they could so that his power can fill the whole earth and his glory can fill the whole earth. And when you go back to Genesis 28 and the dream with Jacob and the ladder, well, he took one of the stones of the place, and it's interesting that word stone is also the word Evan, right? So if you break that word into two pieces, Evan, you have the first part, which is the Aleph, and the Beth, which is Av, which is father, And then if you look at it, Bain, the Beit and the Nun, it's son, Ben. So the Father and the Son. Is it a coincidence? People will say, oh yeah, well, you're just, playing with language. Okay, if you want to say that, I don't think it's such a coincidence. He put it under his head and he laid, because that's the connection, right? It's Father and Son. The Son of Man and the Ancient of Days working together. The Son of Man, regent, power, fulfilling the will of his Father. He had a dream, Jacob did, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of Elohim were ascending and descending on it. They're ascending and descending, which means that they probably spend most of their time on the earth. Now, this ascending and descending, of course, is a convention, right? Because as I have explained many times, it's not likely in terms of spatial things up and down. It's probably more an interdimensional type of thing in terms of the cosmology of the ancient world, which we can talk about another day. But the bottom line is that there's interaction between the heavenly world, and maybe better put than the heavenly world is the spiritual world, let's say, and the temporal world. So there's a connection between them. Heaven and earth are interconnecting, right? Yahshua is praying his model prayer, sanctify Yahweh's name and pray to Yahweh that heaven and earth will be joined again, right? Your kingdom come, so that the way that your will is being done in heaven, let it be done on the earth as well. So the ladder was set on the earth with this top reaching to heaven, the angels of Elohim ascending and descending. And behold, Yahweh stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, the Elohim of your father Abraham, and the Elohim of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. And he goes on and he describes everything else there, okay? This is none other. Jacob wakes up, he says, he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of Elohim, Bethel. And this is the gate of heaven. This is the portal to heaven, if you will. Very interesting. Okay, and there's more there, but that's enough for now. So, so the model prayer is a prayer that it's supposed to reflect the desires of our heart, which is for Yahweh's will that's being done in his realm, that it will be done on the earth as well as it was meant to be done. When you look at Psalms 92 to 98, this is what you're seeing throughout those Psalms as well. So let's just take a couple of examples. So if we go over to this to Psalm 92, it's about praise, right? It's good to give thanks to Yahweh and to sing praises to your name. I will sing for joy at the works of your hands. How great are your works, O Yahweh, etc. And then we go down to Psalm 93. It's all about Yahweh's majesty. Yahweh reigns. He is clothed with majesty. Yahweh is clothed and girded himself with strength. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. Your throne is established from old. You are from everlasting. And everything, the floods, everything is the seas, everything is raising their voices in praise. Down in Psalm 94, Yahweh has been my stronghold and my Elohim, the rock of my refuge. He has brought back their wickedness upon them and will destroy them in their evil. Yahweh Elohim will destroy them. So these are describing all the things that are going to be removed from that kingdom. In Psalm 95, once again, singing for joy to Yahweh, shouting joyfully to the rock of our salvation, coming before his presence. For Yahweh is a great Elohim and a great king above all Elohim. It's all about his kingship and about his people rejoicing before him and the wicked being sent away, right? And you continue through each one of these here. Psalm 96, 97, sing to Yahweh a new song, all the earth, proclaim good tidings, it's gospel, right? Proclaim good tidings of his salvation from day to day and on and on. So there's this theme of all singing for joy, of Yahweh's blessings dominating everything, of his presence filling the earth. Heaven and earth are finally brought together. The wicked are separated, and they're all with him in unity in a single bond. It's also what you see over in Revelation 21, where you see the new heaven and the new earth, right? So the holy city, Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from Elohim, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband, and they're joined together, okay? And this is a constant recurring theme throughout the scriptures, this theme of Yahweh returning to the earth Elohim with us, Emmanuel, right? Elohim with us. He's going to dwell with men again. Yes. He makes all things new. Again in the same chapter, Revelation 21, verse 4, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne, the king, said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. Then he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the Aleph and the Tau, the beginning and the end, and on and on. Because he's from the beginning and he's the end. He has no beginning and no end. He's of eternity. And this kingdom is going to be a kingdom for all eternity. So he makes all things new. The old order is not at all welcome in it. That's why you see, as you continue reading this, all the things that are left out, right? Look at verse 8. But for the cowardly and unbelieving, abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. There's not going to be anything in there that's going to cause harm. And this is what we all long for in our hearts, right? We all long for a world where you don't have any more of all the lying and all of the cheating and the stealing and the murdering and the raping and everything else, right? All the inhumanity of people to one another, image bearers, fellow image bearers, destroying other image bearers or disgracing other image bearers. It's just a horrendous thing to see and to experience. And these are all going to be things that are going to be things of the past. It is, in short, a return to Eden, but beyond that, it's beyond Eden. It's not even just a restoration of Eden. It's beyond Eden, right? It's a restoration of true intimacy that once existed between Yahweh and man. And then what does it look like in action, this kingdom? This is not pie in the sky stuff. These are things that are happening, that are already starting to happen. Why do I say that? How can I say that when there's so much death and destruction in the world? Well, I can say that because for all the death and destruction, there are also people who are acting according to the Spirit of Almighty Yahweh and trying to ease that pain. Saw a movie the other day where someone said that, right? All this, in this movie, the person was a police officer, and he said, I don't believe in, he didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing. The sentiment was, I don't believe in the Almighty because of all the darkness that I've seen and all the evil. Where's the Almighty? That's the question everyone always asks, right? Where's the Almighty in all of that? Where's the Almighty in all these murders and rapes and all these evil things that people do to one another? And the person who was a priest in the movie, he said to him, and people like you who stopped them from doing it. The answer really can't get better than that. And we either believe it or we don't, right? It's like when people say, where was the Almighty on 9/11 when everyone, when the towers were coming down? Well, he was in the 300 firefighters who ran in the building and never came out, and all the police officers who ran in the building and never came out, right? He was in the one guy who ran up something like 30 flights of stairs to try to help bring people down and never made it, because by the time he got down to a certain thing, the towers collapsed. That's where the Almighty was. So, we really have to mature in our thinking and understand that Yahweh is there. And he is now in the midst of us working his salvation among humanity. And we are ambassadors of that. We are the shock troops, right? Over in Matthew 13, there are many parables. The kingdom is like this. The kingdom is like that, right? So I don't want to go through the whole chapter, but I do want to just take a quick look. So you look at, for example, some of these parables, and Yahshua describes what that kingdom is like. So, it's hard because, use a term like kingdom and everyone thinks of a fairy tale, right? So it's hard, as a preacher, it's hard for me to bring some of these things out because I want to be true to the biblical language, but I also know that when I'm speaking to modern audiences, their sensibilities are very skewed. Now, you guys who are out here, I know who you are, you're very used to these things, so I can speak pretty freely. But if I would take this and put it out there publicly on YouTube, which one day I might, right? Some things some things are actually out there. I don't know what kind of response that would get, because when people hear kingdom, oh, they think fairy tales, right? They don't look at, okay, we don't have kingdoms anymore. But you got to look at the ideas behind those things. A kingdom, call it a government, right? Call it a rulership, or whatever you want to call it. If you don't like the term king, and describe it as a leader or a president or a prime minister. It doesn't work exactly the same way, but who cares? We're trying to get people to understand the concept. Prince, right? The Prince of Peace. And he's greater than a prince. He's actually the king of peace in actuality, the Melech. So it's the idea behind it, which is the rulership of Almighty Yahweh on this earth, as compared to the rulership of human beings, who always inevitably mess things up. They are a reflection of the truth of the way that Yahweh is, because they are his image bearers. But because of sin, it's always skewing the picture. So if you look at something like Matthew 13, you have a description of the kingdom. So let me turn there and just look at a couple of these here. So verse 3, and he spoke many things to them in parables. And then he starts speaking the parable of the sower. And then down at verse 13:24, Yahshua presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, do you want us to go and gather them up? He said, no, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. So the kingdom of heaven is right now, this is a perfect description of this present age, right? Where I said that the kingdom is inaugurated, but it's not fully here yet, because you still have tares and wheat mixed together. That's not always going to be the case. So if you try to do things before Yahweh's time, you could wind up making the situation worse, and you can wind up destroying people, image bearers of Yahweh, in the way that you do things, because you're trying to do Yahweh's will in your own way rather than in Yahweh's way and in his time. And I'm just scratching the surface on this. My intent is not to go through each one of these and interpret them all. But these parables here in Matthew 13 about the kingdom of heaven, they're all bringing another aspect of the kingdom out. This one here in 31, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller than all other seeds. But when it is full grown, it is larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. So the kingdom of heaven is barely noticeable, right? It's tiny, like a mustard seed. If you see the mustard seed, it's very, very small. But it's sown out there, and it's smaller, and it's growing, and eventually it will be something that's going to be so large that the birds of the air, which is representative of the nations, people are going to nestle within the kingdom. But it's not happening now. You can't see it. So it would be very easy to make the mistake of thinking, kingdom, what kingdom? What do you mean kingdom? Look at all the evil and darkness that you see around you. Yeah, but you don't understand. It's growing. It's just that you don't see it. You see aspects of it in the good people who are doing their thing, and those firefighters and those police officers and people like you and me who have a kind word and compassion and grace to the people around us, and are giving a witness in the midst of a world full of darkness. And this one here, 13:33, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. Again, there's this concept of the kingdom being hidden, right? Or something hidden within it even. There are different possible interpretations of this. One of the interpretations that I used to believe about this is that a woman took and hid in the leaven. She hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. And I used to think, well, 3 pecks of flour, it might be referring to the 3 elements of the Tanakh, right? The Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, and the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took. She took the leaven and hid it in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. In other words, you have Yahweh's word, which is the pure word, and then the woman who could represent apostate Israel took leaven, which is teaching that is corrupt, and hid it in the scriptures, so that the scriptures became leavened. So you look at the world today, where we're in a constant battle against false religion, because people don't take the word the way it's meant to be written. They take it and they have all kinds of distortions because there's corrupt teaching that's mixed in with the Bible. And when you do that, you come up with false teachings that distorts the message of the kingdom. I personally still think that that's the best interpretation of this particular verse here, but there will be others who will think that I'm just reading too much into the text. I understand it, but it's just kind of it's just too coincidental that it should be 3 pecks of flour, right? And that there's a woman, which is very oftentimes used to refer to religion, or like you look at the book of Proverbs, or either Lady Wisdom, or her opposite, which is false, which is idolatrous religion. So, we can debate that another day. And on we go with different explanations about the kingdom here, right? And the ones who are, he's explaining the tares of the field, and now he's giving a description, right? For the ones who sow the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. That's you, that's me. And then the tares are the sons of the evil one, right? And then he goes and he describes these things. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. So these are things that you see described, for example, in the book of Revelation in the latter chapters. Okay, so don't want to go too deeply into 13, but there are many, you can see many parables in Matthew 13 about the kingdom to understand it better. And then I described last week how John the Baptizer was not certain of whether what he was seeing was the real deal. So you go to Matthew 11, and instead of saying to John, yes, I'm the Messiah, he says in verse 4, go and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. In other words, he's telling him, John, I'm not going to give you a direct answer. I'm going to give you the evidence. I'm going to give you the evidence of what is happening. And because you know the scriptures, you preach the scriptures. And because you know the scriptures, you know what the kingdom of Yahweh is going to look like. So you tell me, John. You tell me, am I the Messiah? You tell me if what you're seeing is the kingdom being inaugurated. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. Those who have skin diseases are cured. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. The good news is proclaimed to the poor. When you see those things happening, what more than likely is that going to mean? Well, you know the scriptures, John. You know Isaiah 35 and what it says in Isaiah 35, where it says, the wilderness and the desert will be glad. The Arabah will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing. It sounds a lot like Psalm 92 and 93 and 94 and on and on. They rejoice with rejoicing and shout of joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. Glory, majesty, those are terms of kingship. Your majesty. They will see the glory of Yahweh, the majesty of our Elohim. Encourage the exhausted and strengthen the feeble. Say to those with anxious heart, you know anybody with anxious heart today? Do you maybe have an anxious heart today? Say to those with anxious heart, including yourself, take courage, don't be afraid. Behold, your Elohim will come with vengeance. The recompense of Elohim will come. Yeah, he sees everything that's going on around you. He sees the corrupt, filthy politics of the day. He sees the corrupt nations doing their thing. Doesn't matter. He's going to bring his recompense. He will save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened. The ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer. All these things will be physical manifestations of an inner cleansing, right? When Yahshua dealt with one person who was blind, he had him do something with his eyes, and then he said, "What do you see?" He says, "Well, I see, but it's like people are trees." He didn't see clearly yet. and then he had him go wash up a little bit more, and then his unbelief washed away, and now he understood and he could see. His eyes were open. Like so many people that they try and they don't actually they don't let go, and then when they fully give themselves to him and they do exactly what he says, then they could see clearly, right? The ears of the deaf will be unstopped. How many people keep their ears closed to the truth? So they're deaf, so the deafness, the physical deafness, and don't get me wrong, with any of this, I'm not at all saying that people who are blind, or people who are deaf, or people who are lame, that there's sin in them. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm using that as a metaphor, generally speaking, right? It's a world condition, has nothing to do with the individuals who find themselves in that condition, because all of us has something that we can claim that, that we need cleansing from, even if it's not a visible thing. But I'm using that as a metaphor that many of those things stand for things that all of mankind is guilty of. So when Yahshua came, he was healing the blind and the deaf and the lame, and it was all representative, right? It was representative. It had nothing to do per se with the individuals and whether they deserved it or whether it had nothing to do with any of that. Remember the one guy who was blind, and they said, who was it, this guy or his parents that are to blame? He said, none of them. So that Yahweh would be glorified. It's lessons, it's metaphor, right? The people are ears, they're deaf. They're deaf to the truth, but those ears are being unstopped. The lame, they're going to leap like deer. The tongue of the mute, they're not able to talk, but they're going to be able to talk so that they could shout for joy and praise his majesty. For waters will break forth in the wilderness and streams in the Arabah, and on, right? In the haunt of jackals, the scorched land will become a pool, right? It's not going to be this dryness anymore. It's going to become like a pool of water, the thirsty ground, springs of water, where jackals used to go around doing their things. Jackals are creatures that thrive. They're scavengers. They thrive on dead and decaying things. And it's going to, in the haunt of jackals, its resting place, grass becomes reeds and rushes. A highway will be there, a roadway. In other words, a complete restoration. It will be called the highway of holiness. The unclean are not going to be on it anymore. They're going to be brushed aside. You're not going to wake up anymore to news reports of the latest murders and the latest atrocities that are being committed, both by nations and by individuals. It's going to be a thing of the past. The unclean will not travel on the highway of holiness, but it'll be for him who walks that way. And fools are not going to wander on it anymore. There are not going to be any wild animals, both physical, not physical, both literal wild animals, no lions, no vicious beasts go upon it, and the people who act like lions and vicious animals, they're not going to be found there anymore. But the redeemed will walk there. The ransom of Yahweh will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion, Psalm 92, 93, and 94. With everlasting joy upon their heads, they will find gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. And by the way, why do I keep returning to Psalm 92 through 98? Because those are Psalms that are announcing the kingdom of Yahweh. Starting with Psalm 92, which is what? It's a song about the Sabbath, which is representative of the kingdom of Yahweh. Just like the Feast of Tabernacles is representative of the kingdom of Yahweh. But the Sabbath is a weekly reminder. It's a weekly reminder when Yahweh ceased from his work and he looked at everything and saw that it was good. He ceased and he rested. And that rested is not, I'm so tired from making everything. That rested is, I now sit on my throne in the temple. I sit on my throne. And I look at everything, and I'm now ruling and watching over everything, right? Because I'm settled in my kingdom, you see. So it starts with Psalm 92, and it goes from there. So there's a lot going on here. Now we also see Isaiah 42. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. It's the Messiah. He will not cry out or raise his voice, nor make his voice heard in the street. He's not going to make a show of it. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not extinguish. The bruised reed, it'd be so easy to just go snap. Why am I even bothering with this? No. And a dimly burning wick, just snuff it out, right? No. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He's going to take the bruised reed and mend it. He's going to take the dimly burning wick and deal with it and blow on it until it breathes life. He breathes life into it again. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice in the earth. He's not going to stop because there's injustice all around us. He's going to establish justice in the earth, just like we can't stop, right? Doing what we're doing just because there's darkness all around us and throw up our hands in the air and say, oh, there's nothing, everything's going to waste and everything is darkness and well, woe is me. No, we're the shock troops. We're the what is the term I'm looking for? The not the descendants, but there's a term. We're the ones who follow the Pauls of the world and the Silases and the Peters and the Johns, right? We're the ones who are I wish I could think of the word. We're the ones the ones who inherit that and bring it forth, right? We're supposed to be. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands will wait expectantly for his law. They're going to wait with anticipation. Just like there are people out there who are waiting with anticipation even now for salvation. And for those who are in Yahshua the Messiah, who will help to bring them hope. That's what we should be doing, helping to bring them hope. They're waiting for us. Are we bringing it? There's got to hand it to the American Association of Christian Counselors and groups like them that are helping with things like mental health these days, whereas other people are talking about it, they're actually doing something about it and preparing people to be able to counsel and coach other people. It's a really beautiful thing. This is the kind of stuff that we have to be part of the solution, rather than sit back with woe is me and wringing our hands and watching Fox News and CNN and MSNBC and Twitter and forget that nonsense. It's not up to them. It's up to Yahweh and his word. And he's already given us our instructions. The emphasis in things like Isaiah 42, by the way, is not on judgment, but rather the restoration after the judgment. Keep reading. Thus says Elohim Yahweh, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and its offspring, who gives breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk in it. I am Yahweh. I have called you in righteousness. I will also hold you by the hand and watch over you. And I will appoint you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations. To do what? To open blind eyes. To bring out prisoners from the dungeon. To release people from the prison of their own mind. Those who dwell in darkness from the prison. I am Yahweh. That is my name. Hallowed be your name. I will not give my glory to another, nor my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things have come to pass. Now I declare new things. Revelation 21. Before they spring forth, I proclaim them to you. Sing to Yahweh a new song. There we go again. Psalm 92, 93, 94. Tell people that there's reason for song. They don't see it because their minds are always on the negative. You have to give them that hope. Sing to Yahweh a new song. Sing his praise from the ends of the earth. You who go down to the sea and all that is in it, you islands and those who dwell on them. Let the wilderness and its cities lift up their voices, the settlements where Kedar inhabits. Let the inhabitants of Selah sing aloud. Let them shout for joy from the tops of the mountains, like the ones who proclaim on the foot of the mountains, right? We read earlier over in Isaiah 52. Let them give glory to Yahweh and declare his praise in the coastlands. Yahweh will go forth like a warrior. He will arouse his zeal like a man of war. He will utter a shout. Yes, he will raise a war cry. He will prevail against his enemies. I have kept silent for a long time. I have kept still and restrained myself. Now, like a woman in labor, I will groan. I will both gasp and pant. Why? Because the time for the thing to be born is here. I will lay waste the mountains and hills and wither all their vegetation. I will make the rivers into coastlands and dry up the ponds. I will lead the blind by a way they do not know, and paths they do not know I will guide them. I'll make darkness into light before them, and rugged places into plains. These are the things I will do, and I will not leave them undone. They will be turned back and be utterly put to shame who trust in idols, who say to molten images, you are our Elohim. It's not up to them. Hear you deaf, and look you blind that you may see. Who is blind but my servant? or so deaf as my messenger whom I send? Who is so blind as he that is at peace with me, or so blind as the servant of Yahweh? You have seen many things, but you do not observe them. Your eyes are open, but none hears. Nobody gets it. Yahweh was pleased for his righteousness' sake to make the law great and glorious, but this is a people plundered and despoiled. All of them are trapped in caves or hidden away in prisons. They have become a prey with none to deliver them, and a spoil with none to say, give them back. But that's going to change. It's about to change. Who among you will give ear to this? Who will give heed and listen hereafter? Who gave Jacob up for a spoil and Israel to plunderers? Was it not Yahweh against whom we have sinned, and in whose ways they were not willing to walk, and whose law they did not obey? So he poured out on him the heat of his anger and the fierceness of battle, and it set him aflame all around. Yet he did not recognize it, and it burned him, but he paid no attention. And then he goes on in chapter 43, talking about the redemption of Israel, right? So this is a long poem. This is poetry that continues, the servant songs. Yahweh delights in mercy and not judgment. You think about something like Psalm 51, you learn that there. And the conflict between judgment and mercy, mercy wins. By the way, that's why legalistic religion has never been Yahweh's will. So there's a paradox that's being described here. The wicked don't like a message of judgment because they perceive rightly that the message of judgment implies judgment over them, right? And at the same time, the good don't always appreciate a message of mercy because they perceive, not rightly, but they perceive that the wicked are going to get away with it. They're not going to get away with it. So this is all describing the balance that's going to be returned by Almighty Yahweh. Everything is not as it seems. The kingdom of Yahweh is here. It's inaugurated by the shed blood of Yahshua Messiah, who was raised to his righteous rule on the weapon of the Romans, that was turned against him, and instead he used it as a means of elevation to his throne, turning it upside its head. And I already explained last week, Mark chapter 10, when the disciples were talking about being on his right and on his left, and he said, no, we're not going to do it that way, right? He's going to turn all expectations upside their head. Let's take a quick look for the remainder of our time at Matthew 5-7, which is the Sermon on the Mount, because this is a great description of what that kingdom is like. The Sermon on the Mount is what the kingdom looks like. If you want to know what the kingdom of Yahweh is like and what it is that we're supposed to be modeling to the world, this is it right here. It's a different way of life integrated into our very lives. It reflects the worldview of the Shema in Deuteronomy 6, when it talks about how we need to love Yahweh with all our heart, soul, and might. We need that worldview where Yahweh's will is going to fill the entire earth. The Beatitudes, which is what these things are called in Matthew 5-7, show what the kingdom is like. The Beatitudes are often, the word beatitude, by the way, is a contraction of beautiful attitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the gentle, etc. That's what's referred to as the Beatitudes. They're simply a collection, according to some people, many people, they're simply a collection of nice sayings, a sort of grouping of, pithy, clever suggestions that would be nice to do. Well, you should be, bless the poor in spirit, and, think about those who mourn, and, no, it's much, much more than that. There's much more going on here than meets the eye. The Beatitudes, in fact, describe the kingdom way of life. In other words, in just a few short verses, our King presented to us and laid out what his kingdom looks like. He laid out the program, what the code of conduct is. So if you want to know what it is to live in the kingdom of Yahweh and to start doing it right now, do this. What the proper attitudes are that will make the world a better place, and that will make it so much more different from what we see out there today in this corrupted, perverted, and hate-filled generation. In other words, when he delivered these Beatitudes, he in effect said, this is what my kingdom looks like. Live in it. It's a different way of life, and it has to be integrated into every area of our lives. People always operate, whether consciously or not, on a particular worldview. They operate based on a particular worldview, which can be religious, it can be political, it can be social. That's why I said that worldview described in Deuteronomy 6, where we recognize our worldview has the foundation that Yahweh is Elohim and Yahweh is one. We are a unity in Almighty Yahweh, and we live according to his dictates in his way. So the Beatitudes present another version of that same worldview in Deuteronomy 6. We, as the body of Messiah, as the assembly, are meant to lead by example as ambassadors, to show the nations what that kingdom is like and how we and they are to live, because we're proclaiming the king, we're proclaiming the gospel. So we're saying the king is coming, get with the program. This is the program. Do we understand that? Do we understand that we are supposed to be leading the charge? We are supposed to be those initial troops, so to speak, spiritual troops, who are supposed to, by word and by deed, show the world how King Yahshua is going to change the world. If we put more emphasis on that and less on the news and less on who's going to be the next president or the new prime minister or the new congressman or the new senator, yeah, those things are important, but they're much less so important than this. This is the one whose opinion truly matters and the one who's going to change the world. And we must never lose sight of that. Yeah, vote. Yeah, participate in local politics. There's some people who don't believe we should do any of that. I'm not one of them. But what I'm saying is that underlying and undergirding all of that, this is more important. Our faithfulness and dedication to the one who gave us these Beatitudes. You want a platform upon which to operate? This is our platform right here. Yahshua died and was resurrected. His message and mission were to be continued by his disciples, beginning with the apostles and the disciples of his day, beginning in Jerusalem, then extending to the rest of Judea and Samaria, and then to the entire world. That's what you see in the book of Acts, particularly in Acts chapter 1. And then in Matthew 24:14, what does it tell you? We'll come back to this in a minute. Matthew 24:14 says, this gospel, this good news of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Are we doing that? Are we preaching this gospel? Are we preaching this good news? The best way that you can preach that is by living it, by example. Those disciples that are being described in this passage here in 28:18. Matthew 28:18, and Yahshua came up and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Do you see that? All authority has been given to me, where? In heaven and on earth, right now. That means he has that authority right now, not sometime in the future, oh, the kingdom is coming. No, the kingdom is here. Let's understand that. All authority has been given to Yahshua in heaven and on earth. Go, therefore, you, me, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. He's always by our side. We today are the heirs of that message and that charge. We have a responsibility to continue to proclaim that message. And that message won't be easy to bring forth because it's going to include suffering and pain. And that's difficult to hear. But like anything worthwhile, the pain will ultimately be worth it. And why must there be pain? Because the world is going to buck against this, right? Because it goes against the easy way. It goes against the pleasurable way. We've entered by virtue of our birth in this time in history, whether we wanted it or not, we're here, right? By virtue of our birth at this time, by acceptance of the faith, we've become part of this ancient battle, this ancient story. This thing began well before we came on the scene. But like it or not, we're currently the ones who have the baton. And it's up to us to continue the race. So we could shrink away in fear or anxiety, or we can rise up to the challenge and say, here we are, Father Yahweh. We're currently the ones who have the baton. The enemy is not going to give up easily, right? Our master suffered, and so we will too. It's inevitable. We're told that even in the Beatitudes. But he's promised to be with us through it all. Over in Mark 8. So this, by the way, this is sort of, like I told you last week, this is sort of a combination study and message, right? Preaching. He summoned the crowd, Yahshua, with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. What does that mean, take up his cross and follow me? Well, it's more than just taking up a burden, right? Like some people say. No, a cross is an instrument of death. It means that you have to be willing to lose your life. You have to be willing to do what it says in Revelation about those who follow the Lamb. The Lamb was slain for the message that he proclaimed, and that is how he's winning the battle. He's winning against the enemy. That's how he's winning the world to himself. And those who follow him must be willing to do the same. Does it mean that we're all going to be martyred someday? No, not at all. Doesn't mean that at all. Even in his day, John wasn't martyred, right? At least according to tradition, John was exiled, but there's no record that John was martyred, but many others were. But this is not talking about martyrdom. This is talking about being willing to lose your life. For some of us, losing our life may one day require some type of physical martyrdom, but that's not the main thing. For some of us, laying down our life means that certain things that we had hoped to do in our careers or in our relationships, maybe we don't get to do them because there are more important things to be done. For some of us, it means that the kind of significance that we hope to have in this world, we may not have that, because when people find out who we are and what we stand for, they may buck against us, and we don't have the level of respect, command the level of respect that others do. But we have to be prepared for that. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save, and the gospels will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul, for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So, I think it's better for us to be honored by the Son and shamed to the world. Just wrapping this up here, it's simply, what is the cross? It's simply an instrument of death. It's a tool of humiliation. And we need to be willing to accept whatever comes our way, because our Messiah gave the example. I don't really have time to go deeply into the Beatitudes, but I encourage you to go through them. Let me just kind of give a real surface overview without going through all of them right now, and I'll let you do that on your own. So I'll just kind of very quickly read through some of these. So verse 3, Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the poor in spirit is not that you have to be poor in this world, right? It's not talking about economics. It's talking about your heart. The poor in spirit are characterized by a spirit of humility. In other words, they have a modest or low view of their own self-importance, right? And then verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Many of us are currently mourning, but we will have comfort and rejoicing someday. So it's not something that we will necessarily be comforted in the immediate, but we know that we're going to be comforted in the future, for sure. Verse 5, blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. So verse 5 has to do with meekness, submissiveness. In other words, a willingness to submit to one who is superior, which is a very different attitude from the one who rebelled against Yahweh in the heavens, and then that rebellion was replicated on earth. So we are having the opposite spirit. And then we have verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Satisfaction or fulfillment. This is referring to that void of that all of humanity has been trying unsuccessfully and incorrectly to fill with many things that lead to compulsions and addictions and all kinds of things that never will fill us. And instead, they're finally going to be filled, because that intimacy with Yahweh that both he and we desire will finally be achieved. And that's whether people realize it. That's what they're trying to fill. They're trying to fill that. They're trying to fulfill that intimacy that was lost at Eden. And they think that they can do it by pleasure seeking. And that's not the way it's done. Verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So this refers to compassion or forgiveness that's shown towards someone when it's within your power to punish or harm them. And instead you show them mercy and compassion. It's the willingness to show that compassion or forgiveness, even when you have the power to not do that. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see Elohim. This is freedom from adulteration or contamination, which includes freedom from immorality. Imagine a world that no longer includes corruption of any sort in the environment, in people's attitudes, in government, etc. And you might also cross-reference there Revelation 22, verses 14 and 15. Verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of Elohim. This peace doesn't refer to the absence of war. That's not it. That's just a superficial peace. This is freedom from disturbance, yes, but even more so, we're talking about a condition of reconciliation and intimacy with our Creator, like we had in the Garden of Eden. There's real, true peace between us and Almighty Yahweh. Nothing in between us, nothing serving as a barrier that's causing a disturbance. It's reconciliation, that sort of peace. It's like if you've ever been in an argument with someone and you feel that sense of unease between the two of you, that tension that exists, and then when you finally make up, that tension dissipates, and then you have relief and a sense of calmness. That's the kind of peace we're talking about here. And then finally, the things you see in verses 10 through 12, blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So all the things that we're looking for in the future are not going to come without discomfort and pain. There's going to be issues, right? And if it's not physical persecution, it's going to be persecution of an emotional kind or some other kind that doesn't affect the body per se, but certainly affects the mind and heart. You know, if you're watching the news these days or commentary programs or whatever, and you're not disturbed by the things that you're saying, and you don't feel a certain level of persecution when you hear your elements of your faith maligned, then you're not doing it right. And I'm not saying that I encourage you to do that a lot, but you need to understand that we're in a time when we are not viewed as religious people. We're not viewed as being desirable in our communities and in our environment. There used to be a time when people were. This is not that time. And then, you might agree with me or not. That's fine. We can have that discussion. But in my lifetime, I've never seen a time like now where we're viewed with religious people, particularly people who, I hesitate to even say religious people, really more specifically Bible believers, are viewed with a degree of suspicion and paranoia and disgust and contempt. And if you're not feeling that, and that's persecution. That's persecution. It's just not leading to physical persecution necessarily, but it's persecution nevertheless. And which will come out in different ways, whether it's suing somebody because they refuse to sell something because of their disagreement of religious belief, or whether it's losing their job because they don't do something that's required of them that the state wants them to do, or, we can come up with a half dozen other examples. So there's real opportunity for persecution nowadays. And some of it is just lost opportunities because people won't accept you into their circles, right? Whatever it is, just understand that we come in a long line of people throughout history who have suffered indignities and injustices because of what they said that they believed. And if you don't believe that, go read the book of Maccabees or just look through the book of Acts and you'll see it. But we have to continue pressing ahead nevertheless, because that's not a luxury for us. That's our way of life. So for our closing scripture today, let's go over to Revelation 21, and we'll begin reading with verse 22. Revelation 22, and we'll read to the end of the chapter. I saw no temple in it, for Yahweh Elohim, the Almighty, and this is in the renewed earth, the reunified heaven and earth, I saw no temple in it, for Yahweh Elohim the Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. And the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of Yahweh has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed, and they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. So thank you for your attention. And let me just say a prayer, and then we'll open it up to any questions, last minute comments.